Okay, once you get your kicker stuff out, the first thing you want to do is put your rings in. So what you do is you drop them down from the inside of the machine until they line up. And it's going to be like this, but on the inside of the machine. First thing you want to do is take, the top hole over here is threaded. It has a nut plate in it. Just put the bolt in. That'd be this one right over here. And keep it loose, but that'll hold the ring up. And then you swing the ring and you stick your other bolts in here, here, and here. And just put the nuts on them and tighten them down a little bit to keep it loose at that point. Tighten this bolt down, the one that's threaded, and then tighten the other 3 bolts down. The reason to do it that way is this. Usually these holes in the machine, or very often the holes in the machine, are elongated. And when the rings are made, the original equipment rings, and we do the same thing, but when the rings are made, it's a 3/8 inch hole, and it's a 5/16 bolt that's going through it, so you got a good amount of play in there. I mean, you can wiggle it all around. If you keep these bolts loose on these corners here, and then tighten this down, but the nut's already on and the bolt's already in, when you tighten the back nut down on each of the bolts, it's going to take the screw, and the screw may be a little bit on an angle, but when you tighten it down, it'll straighten out. Because what we do is we favor the outside edge of the hole of the machine with the holes in our rings, so that the bolt's along the outside edge of the diameter of the hole. And this way, when it's put in and then the nut's tightened down, it takes the bolt and it torques it against the hole of the machine, whether it's worn or not, and the ring stays in there a lot tighter. If you tighten your threaded one down first and then try to get your bolts in, sometimes it's going to be a little difficult because sometimes the holes in the machines aren't exactly right and you won't be able to get the bolt in as easily. So get the bolt all the way in, put the nut on, tighten the threaded one down, then torque the screws down by the nut ends. The bolts will torque up against the frame of the machine and the ring will stay in there real tight on like original equipment rings. When you're all said and done and you want to put these little bumpers back in that the rudder arm hits, very often you'll need to put a washer on it so that it's out enough and the rudder arm doesn't hit the metal part of the ring. The only time you got to worry about that is if you got spring shocks, because then you'll hear a big clang, clang, clang every time the rudder arm goes back and forth. So you might have to put a washer on there. Now through design, when that's on there, what's going to happen is part of this piece is going to overhang on part of the lip of the ring. Actually, it'll be, where the hell will it be? Down here. And the reason that we bring the ring down further here, so that you can, when this goes in, it overhangs a little bit, is it'll put the rubber piece on a little bit of an angle when it's in the machine, because when the rudder arm comes over, it's on an angle. And this way it'll hit the rubber flush. If it comes straight in, all you guys out there know, what it does is one corner of it gets squished down and the ring starts clanging. Whereas the way we do it, when the rudder arm comes, it hits the whole piece flush. Alright, once you get the 2 sets of rings in, one on each side, the lift arm won't be in yet. I'm going to take that out and show you different ways on how to adjust that. But the next thing you want to do is put your lower bracket across the 2 rings. Put your spacer in right here. There's 4 bolts, or 4 nuts rather, that goes on the bolts that's welded to the rings. Put your nuts on and torque them down so that the back of the bolt is flush with the nut. And that'll compress these spacers in here and keep the right torqueness and the spacing between the lift arm and the bolt that comes up that bolts it in place. And then you put your back strap on and just put it together just the way you took it apart. And then the next thing to do is make sure that we adjust the height of the ball lift properly. I'm going to show you that, and how to adjust the lift arm to fit your particular machine. Every machine's a little bit different. When you put these lift arms in, just like if you put a PBL in or a kicker or anything else, they may be a little bit different. In other words, the rubber here on the lift arm is supposed to be even with these flanges all the way. And it's pretty simple to get it like that, and that's what I'm going to show you next. Okay, the lift arm here. It's real important that this lift arm is put in right and that the curvature of the lift arm here conforms to the curvature of the rings. On different machines, what's going to happen is this lift arm may be a little more forward or a little more back, or it depends on where these holes are on your machine. Sometimes there's variances. The brackets that your rail bracket here would bolt to, that this slips into. So it slips into this groove and just slides down. They may be a little bit different, so you may have to tweak the angle of this out a little bit to get it just right. And I'll show you that in a minute. One thing you want to make sure that you do is there's got to be 3 spacers at least behind here. Now, washers are a little different thicknesses, but the bottom line is when it's bolted onto the rail bracket and it's sitting in place like that, the nut that goes on the back of here, the top of the nut should be even with the end of the bolt. And then you got enough spacers in there and the bracket will fit in between. If the nut's in too far, that means that this whole piece is in further in the machine in relationship to your up rails, and that could create a problem. It can create a clunking in the machine, and it can create belt damage. So you want to make sure that this is shimmed far enough forward into the machine so that you're clearing your rail brackets on each side of it, and there's no obstruction for the ball to go through. So there's always going to be at least 3 washers here. You could put an extra one if for some reason you feel like you got to shim this a little more forward and you put another washer. You might want to go with the lower profile lock nut in that case. It's not the nylon type because you want it to lock on there so it doesn't come loose. But usually 3 washers is sufficient. If you have less than 3, you're not going to have the right dimensions in regards to where the lift arm is sitting and where your up rails are coming. So you want to make sure that that's shimmed out right. Another thing that's going to vary from machine to machine is the amount of washers on this bottom plate over here. This particular machine, there's 2 in there. And I know that's where it needs to be set because I had the lift arm in there. But sometimes you need 3 washers, sometimes you need 4, sometimes you need 1. It all depends on how everything in your machine is lining up. But when you put your lift arm in, you just make sure you hold the washers with your fingers back here so they don't fall off. Just bring it up to the bottom bolt, and the whole thing will just drop right in, and it'll be like that. Okay, now right now, the idea of these washers on the bottom is to get this part of the rubber perfectly even with this part of the flange of the ring. So you want this right here even with the ring, so that when the ball rolls in, it just rolls right on top of it here. So no obstruction at all.